Fill my heart with your word, that I may praise your name, and I'll give glory to thee, my God.
A popular concept applied to the interpretation of prophecy is a feature called postponement. This view states that prophecies may be postponed when God determines that the time isn't right. No one doubts that the times and seasons chosen by God are His business, but there are details here that reach beyond what Scripture would actually allow. When God sets a time for the fulfillment of a prophecy, the interpreter cannot seek ways to revise God's timing. Jeremiah prophesied 70 years of captivity. And the whole land shall be a desolation and a horror, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Then it will be, when 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares the Lord. That's in Jeremiah 25:11 through 12. In Daniel 9:2, we read that Daniel saw the time was fulfilled and interpreted it to mean that God was about to do what He said He would do. That's clearly what he understood, because it's the focus of the prayer that he then prays. We look upon Daniel as having great faith by believing that God would fulfill His word in the specified time frame. But later in Daniel 9, we read of 70 weeks prophesied before the completion of the Messiah's work. That's in verses 24 through 27. Modern interpreters don't always treat the period specified at the end of the chapter, the 70 weeks, the same way Daniel treated the 70 years at the beginning of the chapter. They do interpret the time as reaching down to the Messiah, but then insert a gap to postpone the fulfillment. The resulting gap is then used to justify a reinterpretation of the vision in Daniel 2, demanding that the fourth kingdom be revived at a future date to fulfill the promises that Israel rejected at Christ's first coming. Why do that? The kingdom established in the first century doesn't look the way some people want it to look, so they conclude that it must not be what God intended. So it's going to have to be repeated. Rather than interpret, this approach imposes personal perceptions of what God should do on what actually happened. Related to the concept of prophetic postponement is the idea that prophecies may be conditional. It actually becomes essential to the postponement view, because a reason must be given for claiming that some prophecies that were supposed to be fulfilled actually ended up being postponed. The classic prophecy claimed to prove this conditional view is Jonah's. Jonah prophesied that the city of Nineveh would be overthrown in 40 days. However, the people repented, and God did not destroy it. We're told that the prophecy must have been conditional, or Nineveh would have been destroyed. As we discussed in a previous video, and I'll put the link up here, the work of prophets was not just predicting future events. Jesus called the work of Jonah preaching in Matthew 12:41. When a prophet foretold the destruction of sinners, the destruction was not a foretelling of their future, but forewarning of what would occur if the message of the prophet was not heeded. God makes this very clear in Jeremiah 18, verses 1 through 10. Another passage used is the postponement of the Israelites occupying the land of promise in Numbers. They were put off for 40 years before they were allowed to go in. But wait a minute. God didn't tell them they would get in at a specified time, nor did He promise that all of them would survive the journey. Some of them did go in, and it was not outside of any time implied in the promise. This was not a postponement of prophecy. Well, our next video will undertake a study of something rarely given any attention, and that's the purpose of those Old Testament quotes in the New Testament. We assume that every quote is a fulfillment of prophecy, but not necessarily. There are 4 reasons for them being there, and I hope you'll join me for that study.